In the grand parade of American history, where first ladies are often remembered for their public image, fashion, or political savvy, one woman defies the pattern, not by standing tall in the spotlight, but by shaping the future from the shadows. Eliza McCardle Johnson was never the center of attention, never a name splashed across headlines, yet her quiet presence helped steer a president, hold together a family in crisis, and outlast some of the nation's darkest hours. Frail in health but steely in conviction, she never delivered a grand speech, never led a public crusade, yet her influence reached the heart of the White House and helped navigate a presidency born in tragedy. This is not the story of a dazzling debutante or political firebrand. It's the story of a girl from the Tennessee frontier whose resilience, intellect, and silent strength turned a tailor into a president and a marriage into a partnership that weathered war, impeachment, and relentless personal loss. Who was this woman whose hand stitched both garments and destinies, whose mind quietly edited speeches that would echo through Congress, and whose retreat into privacy made her nearly mythic? In a culture obsessed with volume and visibility, what can we learn from someone whose power lay in steadfast presence and quiet endurance? If you think impact requires attention, this is the story that will challenge everything you believe. Stay with us as we uncover the extraordinary life of a First Lady most Americans have never truly met, and rediscover the kind of strength history too often forgets to mention. Childhood and Family Foundation, 1810 to 1826. Eliza McCardle entered the world on October 4, 1810, in Greenville, Tennessee, a rugged frontier region at the dawn of the 19th century, where the lingering echoes of the American Revolution resonated amid undulating hills and dense, untamed forests. This location, as recorded in the Johnson Family Bible, placed her in a small but growing community that embodied the challenges and opportunities of early American expansion. Families in this area eked out survival from the land or modest artisan trades, relying on self-sufficiency in an environment where harsh weather, limited infrastructure, and the constant push of westward migration defined daily existence. Her father, John McCardle, worked as a shoemaker of Scottish descent, crafting sturdy footwear from leather for local farmers, travelers, and townsfolk, a trade that required skillful handiwork and an understanding of community needs. In addition to shoemaking, he operated as an innkeeper, providing lodging, meals, and basic services to stagecoach passengers and settlers passing through the burgeoning frontier area, which was still recovering from the upheavals of territorial disputes and the integration into the young United States. This dual occupation positioned the family as essential contributors to Greenville's social and economic fabric, offering a modest but stable livelihood in a town that served as a county seat with its courthouse, churches, and emerging stores. Her mother, Sarah Phillips McCardle, held ancestral ties to Plymouth, Massachusetts, connecting her to the early Puritan settlers who emphasized hard work, faith, and community. Sarah managed the household with diligence, overseeing domestic tasks that included cooking hearty meals from local produce, tending to the family's small garden for vegetables like corn and beans, and ensuring the inn's cleanliness to accommodate guests. As the only child, Eliza grew up in a close-knit unit where parental roles blended practicality with nurturing, setting the stage for her future emphasis on family support and quiet resilience. The death of John McCardle occurred when Eliza was still very young, in her early childhood, leaving a profound void in the family and thrusting Sarah into the role of sole provider. In an era where women's economic opportunities were severely limited by societal norms that confined them to domestic spheres, Sarah's resilience became the cornerstone of their survival. She took on additional responsibilities, weaving quilts from scraps of fabric and wool gathered from local sheep, a labor-intensive process that involved carding fibers, spinning yarn on a wheel, and piecing intricate patterns by hand under the dim light of oil lamps. These quilts, often featuring designs like the log cabin or nine patch that symbolized home and perseverance, were sold to neighbors or travelers for income, supplementing the family's needs in a time when cash was scarce and bartering common. Sarah also crafted sandals and other leather goods, echoing her late husband's trade by using remnants from his workshop to create durable items for sale at local markets or the inn. This shift in family dynamics required young Eliza to contribute early, helping with these tasks by learning to thread needles, sort materials, or assist in sales, which instilled in her a deep sense of responsibility and thrift. The psychological impact of this loss shaped Eliza's character profoundly, fostering an awareness of life's impermanence and the necessity of self-reliance from a tender age. Without a father figure, she developed a strong bond with her mother, observing Sarah's adaptability in managing both emotional grief and practical survival, which modeled for Eliza the quiet strength required to navigate adversity. This experience honed her empathy and stoicism, qualities that would later manifest in her supportive role during her husband's political trials and her own health struggles. To further secure financial stability, Sarah remarried Moses Whitesides, a silversmith or clockmaker, whose trade involved crafting intricate items like jewelry, utensils, or repairing timepieces with precision, tools imported from distant cities like Philadelphia. Whitesides' skills were valuable in a community where such refined goods represented emerging prosperity, and his presence introduced a stepfather into Eliza's life, providing economic support and allowing the family to maintain a modest home with basic furnishings like wooden beds, a hearth for cooking, and storage for crafted goods. This remarriage, common for widows seeking security in frontier society, likely offered Eliza a measure of stability, enabling her to focus on personal growth amid the household's evolving dynamics, though the relationship remained functional, centered on shared responsibilities rather than deep emotional ties. This period in American history marked one of rapid transformation across the young nation, with Tennessee embodying the spirit of frontier opportunity and volatility. The War of 1812 had concluded in 1815, spurring westward expansion as veterans and settlers flooded the region, drawn by fertile lands and promises of independence. Tennessee, admitted to the Union in 1796 as the 16th state, experienced a population surge from about 105,000 in 1800 to over 422,000 by 1830-1820, fueled by migrations from neighboring states like Virginia and the Carolinas, where families sought new beginnings amid economic pressures back east. Politically, the state became a hotbed of fervor, with figures like Andrew Jackson, a fellow Tennessean, rising to prominence through his military exploits, particularly his decisive victory at the Battle of New Orleans in 1815, which elevated him to national hero status and symbolized the triumph of the common man over elite powers. Jackson's populist rhetoric resonated in communities like Greenville, where local rallies and discussions in taverns or courthouses introduced residents to ideas of democracy and expansionism, subtly influencing young minds like Eliza's through overheard conversations or community events. The state's landscape featured small farms, dotting the Appalachian foothills, emerging towns with dirt roads connecting them, and Native American territories under increasing pressure from settler encroachment, leading to conflicts such as the Creek War of 1813 to 1814 and the groundwork for Jackson's later Indian Removal Act. Economically, Tennessee relied heavily on agriculture, with cotton emerging as a cash crop in the central and western regions, driving prosperity but also deepening social divides. In East Tennessee, where Greenville nestled in fertile valleys surrounded by mountains, subsistence farming predominated, with families raising livestock like pigs and cattle, growing grains such as wheat and corn, and supplementing income through trades. The Mississippi River acted as a vital artery for trade, transporting goods like timber, furs, and farm produce southward to New Orleans, while bringing back manufactured items, ideas, and diverse cultures, including Scottish-Irish immigrants like the McCardles, English settlers, and small free black communities, though rigid racial hierarchies enforced segregation and limited interactions. The economy fluctuated with post-war inflation and the Panic of 1819, a financial crisis that caused bank failures and land value drops, straining artisan families like Eliza's and teaching lessons in fiscal caution that she would later apply in managing household investments. Slavery formed an inextricable part of society, even in Union-leaning areas of East Tennessee, where abolitionist sentiments existed but did not dominate the landscape. Enslaved individuals labored on farms and in households, contributing to the economic fabric that indirectly supported free white families, like the McCardles, who, despite their modest means, lived in a world where bondage shaped labor dynamics and social norms. By 1820, Tennessee's enslaved population constituted about 19% of the total, with East Tennessee having fewer large plantations but still relying on enslaved labor for tasks like field work or domestic help. This institution divided communities along lines of loyalty and morality, creating tensions that foreshadowed the Civil War divisions Eliza would later navigate as the wife of a Unionist senator. Women's roles remained tightly circumscribed to the domestic sphere, with marriage and motherhood as primary life paths, reinforced by legal systems that granted husbands control over property and decisions. Education for girls represented a rare privilege, often confined to rudimentary skills like reading the Bible, basic writing for correspondence, and sewing for practical purposes, all aimed at preparing them for homemaking rather than independent careers or public engagement. Societal ideals deeply influenced by evangelical Protestantism that swept the South during the Second Great Awakening, a religious revival emphasizing personal piety and moral reform, stressed modesty, submission, and spiritual devotion for women. Revivals in camp meetings, where families gathered for days of preaching and hymn singing, promoted these values, blending faith with community bonding in Greenville's churches. Yet, in frontier settings, women like Sarah McCardle frequently assumed practical responsibilities beyond the ideal, managing finances during widowhood, bartering goods at markets, or even handling inn operations, which blurred traditional gender lines out of sheer necessity and survival demands. Despite these societal constraints, Sarah's determination ensured that Eliza received an education beyond the norm for rural girls, enrolling her in a local girls' school, the Rhea Academy in Greenville. This modest institution, named after Presbyterian minister Samuel Doak Rhea and sponsored by the local church, offered a curriculum tailored to young women, focusing on foundational skills that equipped Eliza with unusual breadth for her class and gender. Spelling lessons involved rote memorization of complex words from dictionaries or primers, building vocabulary essential for clear communication. Grammar covered sentence structure and proper usage, fostering the literacy that would later allow Eliza to tutor her husband in writing and oratory. Arithmetic included basic calculations like addition, subtraction, and simple fractions, vital for household budgeting, measuring fabrics for quilts, or tracking sales of leather goods. Geography introduced maps of the expanding United States detailing territories from the Louisiana Purchase of 1803, igniting curiosity about rivers like the Tennessee and Cumberland that crisscross the state, and perhaps inspiring thoughts of the world beyond her hills. History classes emphasized American independence, with stories of heroes like George Washington and Thomas Jefferson instilling patriotic values and a sense of national identity in a young republic. Philosophy touched on moral treatises, drawing from Enlightenment thinkers like John Locke or Jean-Jacques Rousseau, though adapted for female students to highlight virtue, ethics, and the role of women in nurturing family morals. Needlework, encompassing embroidery, sewing, and quilting, went beyond mere craft. It served as a practical skill for mending clothes, creating linens, or producing items for sale, reflecting the era's emphasis on thrift, self-sufficiency, and artistic expression through patterns that carried symbolic meanings of home, faith, and community. Eliza's childhood blended hardship with simple joys, creating a resilient young girl profoundly shaped by her environment. Daily life revolved around assisting her mother with chores, weaving quilts in a process that began with shearing sheep, carding wool to remove impurities, spinning it into yarn on a foot-powered wheel, dyeing with natural plants like indigo for blues or walnut hulls for browns, and finally piecing and quilting layers together in communal bees where women gathered to stitch and share stories. Making sandals involved cutting leather patterns, punching holes for laces, and stitching soles, using tools from her father's workshop to produce items sold at Greenville's weekly market, where bartering for flour, sugar, or cloth was common. These tasks taught economy and perseverance as the family navigated economic fluctuations, like the post-war boom followed by the 1819 panic, which devalued currency and made every penny count. Eliza absorbed family stories of Scottish ancestors, tales of Highland clans enduring battles, migrating across the Atlantic in cramped ships facing storms and disease and settling in America with dreams of freedom, fostering a strong sense of heritage and identity rooted in endurance. Her mother's Plymouth roots included narratives of the Mayflower voyage in 1620, with pilgrims facing harsh winters and forging covenants for self-governance, blending religious piety with themes of American exceptionalism and communal support. These oral histories, shared around the hearth on long winter evenings lit by tallow candles, nurtured Eliza's intellectual curiosity and emotional depth, providing solace amid the physical demands of frontier life, such as fetching water from nearby springs, tending chickens for eggs, or helping preserve food through salting meat or canning fruits in summer. Meeting and marriage to Andrew Johnson, and the early years of marriage and family building, 1826 to 1850. Building upon the foundation of her resilient childhood in Greenville, Tennessee, marked by the early loss of her father, her mother's resourceful remarriage, and an education that set her apart from many rural girls of her era, Eliza McCardle's life took a pivotal turn in September 1826. This was the moment when her path intersected with that of Andrew Johnson, a young man whose arrival in town would not only reshape her personal world, but also lay the groundwork for a partnership that influenced American history. At the time, Greenville was a modest frontier community in East Tennessee, with a population hovering around 500 residents. Centered around a courthouse square where locals gathered for markets, legal proceedings, and social exchanges. The town, nestled in the Appalachian foothills, served as a hub for travelers along stagecoach routes connecting to larger cities like Knoxville to the west and Asheville, North Carolina to the east. Its economy thrived on agriculture, cornfields, tobacco patches, and livestock herds, supplemented by artisan trades such as blacksmithing, tanning, and tailoring, which catered to the needs of settlers pushing westward. The air was filled with the sounds of wagons rumbling over dirt roads, church bells calling for Sunday services, and the chatter of merchants bartering goods like salt, iron tools, and homespun cloth. Slavery, though less pervasive here than in the cotton-rich plantations of Middle and West Tennessee, was woven into the social fabric, with about 10 to 15% of households owning enslaved people for farm labor or domestic help, reflecting the region's divided loyalties between Unionist sentiments in the mountains and pro-slavery influences from the broader South. Andrew Johnson, then 17 years old, arrived in Greenville with his impoverished family, including his mother Mary Polly McDonough Johnson and stepfather Turner Doherty. Born on December 29, 1808 in Raleigh, North Carolina, Andrew had endured a childhood of extreme hardship. His father, Jacob Johnson, a stable hand and porter, died when Andrew was just 3, leaving the family destitute. To survive, Polly apprenticed her sons to a local tailor named James Selby at ages 10 and 14 respectively, binding them to years of indentured labor where they learned to cut patterns, stitch seams, and mend garments using needles, thimbles, and irons heated over coals. The apprenticeship system, common in the early 19th century, provided basic skills but often exploited young workers, with long hours in dimly lit shops and minimal compensation beyond food and lodging. By 1824, Andrew and his brother William fled their contract in Laurens, South Carolina, after a prank involving a local girl led to threats of punishment, crossing state lines to evade recapture under fugitive apprentice laws. They briefly returned to Raleigh, but facing debts and limited prospects, migrated westward to Tennessee in search of independence. The journey, likely by foot and wagon, along rugged trails like the Great Wagon Road, brought them to Greenville, where Andrew saw potential in the town's growing need for affordable clothing amid the influx of settlers. With meager savings, he rented a small wooden building on Main Street and hung a sign reading A. Johnson, Tailor, offering services like custom suits, vests, and repairs for farmers' overalls or merchants' coats, priced affordably to attract clientele in a cash-poor economy. Eliza, at 15 years old and still attending the RIA Academy sporadically, while helping her mother with household duties, caught sight of Andrew on his first day in town. Local lore, passed down through generations and recorded in family histories, vividly captures the encounter. As Andrew drove a rickety cart pulled by a blind pony, laden with his few possessions, including sewing tools and fabric scraps, Eliza turned to a friend and declared, "There goes the man I'm going to marry." This prophetic statement, whether apocryphal or genuine, underscores the intuitive spark that ignited between them. Eliza, shaped by her own experiences of loss and self-reliance, recognized in Andrew a kindred spirit. Both came from humble origins marked by parental death and economic struggle, yet harbored ambitions beyond their circumstances. Andrew's determination to build a business mirrored Eliza's intellectual curiosity and practical skills, honed from weaving quilts and managing chores. Their shared Scottish-Irish heritage, Andrew's ancestors from Ulster, Eliza's from Scotland, may have fostered an immediate cultural affinity in a region where immigrant communities clustered for support. The courtship unfolded quickly, fueled by mutual respect and complementary strengths. Andrew, though rough around the edges with his limited formal education, he could read basics from apprenticeship primers, but struggled with writing and arithmetic, found in Eliza a gentle mentor. She, in turn, was drawn to his charisma and work ethic, qualities that promised stability in an uncertain frontier life. During their brief courtship, Andrew temporarily left Greenville for a short period, possibly to settle family affairs in North Carolina or scout for better opportunities, during which they exchanged letters. This correspondence, though none survive today due to the family's later destruction of personal records, amid wartime chaos likely served as a bridge, allowing Eliza to share her knowledge through written words while Andrew practiced his penmanship. Upon his return in early 1827, their bond solidified, leading to marriage on May 17th at the home of Eliza's mother, Sarah Whitesides, in Warrensburg, a nearby hamlet. At 16, Eliza became the youngest First Lady to marry, while Andrew was 18, making them one of the youngest presidential couples. The ceremony, simple and reflective of their modest means, was officiated by Mordecai Lincoln, a local justice of the peace and distant relative of Abraham Lincoln, specifically a first cousin to Abraham's father, Thomas Lincoln, adding an ironic historical footnote given Andrew's later succession to Abraham's presidency. Weddings in the 1820s Tennessee were community affairs, often held at home with neighbors, contributing food like cornbread, venison stew, and apple cider, followed by fiddle music and dancing. No elaborate gowns or rings marked the occasion. Eliza likely wore a practical calico dress she sewed herself, and the couple exchanged vows emphasizing partnership in a Presbyterian-influenced service that stressed fidelity and mutual support. They began married life in a humble two-room wooden house on Main Street, rented for a few dollars a month, where one room served as Andrew's tailor shop and the other as their living quarters. The shop, about 12 feet square with a dirt floor, plank walls, and a small window for light, contained essentials like a cutting table, goose irons, heavy metal irons shaped like geese for pressing seams, and bolts of wool or linen fabric sourced from local weavers or merchants in Knoxville. Andrew worked long hours, from dawn to dusk, measuring clients with tape, drafting patterns on brown paper, and stitching by hand with waxed thread, earning perhaps 50 cents for a vest or $2 for a suit. Eliza managed the domestic side, cooking simple meals over an open hearth, oatmeal porridge for breakfast, beans and salt pork for dinner, and keeping the space tidy amid the clutter of fabric scraps and tools. This setup exemplified the era's blending of work and home life for artisan families, where wives often assisted in businesses while handling childcare and chores. The couple's early union was not just romantic but pragmatic, rooted in shared goals of upward mobility in a society where class barriers loomed large for the uneducated and poor. Psychologically, this marriage represented for Eliza an extension of her childhood lessons in resilience. Having lost her father young, she embraced a role as partner and educator, channeling her RIA Academy knowledge to uplift her husband. For Andrew, haunted by poverty and apprenticeship hardships, Eliza offered stability and intellectual companionship, alleviating the insecurities that fueled his later political drive. The early years of marriage, spanning from 1827 to 1850, proved a grind of building a shared life amid financial strains and growing responsibilities. Eliza, with her superior education compared to most women of her class, having mastered grammar, arithmetic, and philosophy at the RIA Academy, naturally assumed the role of teacher to her husband. Contrary to popular myths perpetuated in later biographies, which romanticized Eliza as teaching Andrew to read from scratch, he had acquired basic literacy during his apprenticeship, deciphering simple texts like newspapers or Bible passages. However, Eliza refined these skills, honing his writing through penmanship exercises, arithmetic via practical calculations for shop inventories, measuring fabric yards or tallying expenses, grammar for clear correspondence, and oratory by coaching him in public speaking techniques drawn from her history and philosophy lessons. Evenings in their cramped home became intimate tutorials. As Andrew sewed by candlelight, stitching buttonholes or hemming trousers, Eliza read aloud from borrowed books, perhaps Thomas Jefferson's writings on democracy, classical speeches by Cicero, or contemporary newspapers like the National Intelligencer discussing Jacksonian politics. These sessions sparked discussions on philosophy, such as Enlightenment ideas of equality and self-improvement, and politics, including Tennessee's debates over internal improvements like roads and canals. This education not only boosted Andrew's confidence, but also ignited his interest in public debating clubs, where he honed arguments on issues like tariffs and states' rights, laying the foundation for his political ascent. Eliza's teaching method was patient and encouraging, reflecting her own upbringing under Sarah's resilient guidance, and it fostered a deep intellectual bond, transforming their marriage into a true partnership where her behind-the-scenes influence amplified his public voice. Family expansion began swiftly, adding layers of joy and challenge to their lives. Their first child, Martha, arrived on October the 25th, 1828, just over a year after the wedding, born in the back room of the tailor shop, amid the scents of wool and leather. Martha's birth marked the start of Eliza's primary role as mother, balancing infant care, nursing, swaddling in homemade linens, and rocking in a cradle carved by Andrew with household duties. Charles followed on February 19, 1830, named perhaps after a family friend or biblical figure, introducing the demands of two young children in a space barely sufficient for adults. Mary came next on October 8, 1832, her arrival coinciding with Andrew's growing involvement in local politics as an alderman, leaving Eliza to manage the home alone during his absences. Robert was born on February 22, 1834, expanding the family to 4 children under 6, a period of intense physical labor for Eliza, who washed diapers by hand in creek water, prepared meals from garden vegetables and hunted game, and mended clothes for both family and shop. The youngest, Andrew Johnson, Jr., nicknamed Frank, arrived much later on August 5, 1852. When Eliza was 41, a surprise addition that highlighted the couple's enduring bond, but also strained her health, as pregnancies in later years often exacerbated underlying conditions like the tuberculosis that would later plague her. As Andrew's tailoring business thrived, bolstered by his reputation for quality work and fair prices, attracting clients from surrounding counties, the family's circumstances improved, allowing investments that reflected their rising status. By the early 1840s, they purchased enslaved individuals to assist with household chores, a common practice among upwardly mobile artisans in Tennessee, where slavery was legal and economically advantageous despite East Tennessee's relatively low slaveholding rates. About 9% of the population owned slaves in 1850. Dolly, a 14-year-old girl, and her half-brother Sam, age 17, were the first, acquired in 1842 at a Greenville auction for $500 and $541 respectively, sums financed through shop profits. Dolly, born around 1828, handled cooking, cleaning, and childcare, preparing simple Southern fare like biscuits, greens, and ham in the family's kitchen. Sam assisted in the shop, running errands, delivering garments, or helping with heavy lifting, while also performing yard work. The household grew to include others: Liz, Dolly's daughter, born 1846, Florence, born 1850, and William Andrew, born 1858, whose lighter complexions noted in census records have led historians to speculate on Andrew's possible paternity, though no definitive evidence exists. By the 1850s, the Johnsons owned 8 or 9 enslaved people, listed in slave schedules as ranging from infants to adults, contributing to domestic stability that freed Eliza for family oversight and Andrew for politics. Eliza managed these individuals daily, assigning tasks like laundry, boiling clothes in copper kettles, gardening, tending plots for corn and potatoes, or childcare, supervising the children during Eliza's rests. Her personal feelings on slavery remain unrecorded, lost to history amid the family's destroyed papers, but contextual clues suggest a pragmatic approach. As a product of her time and place, she viewed it as normative, yet post-emancipation loyalty from Sam and others, who stayed as paid workers, implies fair treatment relative to era standards. In Tennessee, slavery was entrenched, with the 1850 census showing over 239,000 enslaved people statewide, fueling debates that Andrew engaged in as a Democrat advocating for white working-class rights while owning slaves himself. Eliza's steady hand in managing the home, finances, and investments was crucial, allowing Andrew to pursue politics without domestic distractions. She tracked shop accounts and ledgers, calculating profits from sales, perhaps $300 annually in early years, rising to thousands by the 1840s. Invested in local real estate like farmland or town lots, yielding rental income and ensured frugality by preserving food through canning or smoking. This financial acumen, rooted in her arithmetic lessons and childhood thrift, enabled the family to upgrade residences. In 1831, they moved to a larger brick home on Water Street with separate living quarters and expanded shop space, accommodating the growing children and enslaved help. By 1851, they acquired an even grander residence on Main Street, a 2-story frame house with parlors, bedrooms, and a detached kitchen, symbolizing their ascent from poverty to middle-class respectability. Throughout this phase, Eliza embodied humility and dedication, prioritizing family over social engagements like town balls or ladies' teas, which she avoided due to her introverted nature and increasing health concerns. Her days revolved around nurturing the children, teaching them basics like reading from McGuffey readers, instilling moral values through Bible stories, and overseeing their chores, while supporting Andrew's ambitions. The political career of Andrew and the silent support of Eliza, 1852 to 1857. As Andrew's congressional term wound down in 1853, he set his sights on the Tennessee governorship, a position that would elevate him to statewide prominence. The election pitted him against Whig opponent Gustavus A. Henry amid a polarized political climate fueled by debates over slavery's expansion and internal improvements. Andrew campaigned vigorously across Tennessee's rugged terrain, delivering fiery speeches that emphasized his Jacksonian roots, opposition to aristocratic privilege, support for public education to uplift the poor, and advocacy for homestead rights to prevent land monopolies. His platform resonated in East Tennessee's mountainous counties, where smallholders like himself predominated. Eliza, though physically weakened, played a vital behind-the-scenes role. From her Greenville parlor, she edited draft speeches late into the night, refining awkward phrasing and incorporating rhetorical devices drawn from her reading of Shakespeare and historical biographies. Make it plain and forceful, she might advise, boosting Andrew's confidence during moments of doubt. Letters exchanged during his travels reveal her encouragement. reminders of his humble origins and the importance of fighting for the mechanic and laborer. Rarely did she accompany him on the campaign trail. Her health and preference for privacy precluded it, but her influence was palpable in his polished oratory. Andrew's victory in the 1853 gubernatorial election, securing 63,413 votes to Henry's 61,163, marked a triumph for Democratic populism. Inaugurated on October 3, 1853 in Nashville, he moved into the governor's residence, though Eliza remained primarily in Greenville due to her condition and family obligations. As governor, Andrew pursued an ambitious agenda centered on education reform. Tennessee lagged in public schooling, with literacy rates hovering around 70% in rural areas. Johnson proposed a comprehensive system funded by state taxes, arguing that education was the great equalizer for impoverished youth like his younger self. In his first message to the legislature, he urged funding for common schools, teacher training, and libraries, estimating costs at $200,000 annually, a bold investment in an agrarian state. Eliza, aware of Andrew's own educational deficits, wholeheartedly supported this. She had long tutored their children and saw public schools as a moral imperative. From afar, she reviewed his legislative proposals, suggesting analogies from biblical parables to underscore the virtue of knowledge. Beyond education, Andrew's governorship addressed infrastructure and fiscal policy. He championed railroad expansion, signing legislation in 1854 authorizing state bonds worth millions to subsidize lines connecting Nashville to Knoxville and beyond. These internal improvements aim to integrate Tennessee into national markets, boosting agriculture and commerce in regions like Greenville. However, he tempered this with fiscal conservatism, vetoing extravagant bank charters and advocating for debt reduction. His opposition to secessionist whispers, early rumbles from pro-slavery extremists, further defined his Unionist stance. In speeches, he warned against disunion, invoking the Constitution's sanctity. Eliza's input here was subtle but profound. Her letters often included clippings from northern newspapers, providing broader perspectives on national debates. The 1854 to 1855 period saw Eliza's health fluctuate dramatically. Tuberculosis' relapsing, remitting nature meant periods of relative stability interspersed with acute episodes. By mid-1854, she experienced severe coughing fits, sometimes producing blood-specked sputum, forcing her to bed for weeks. Family lore recounts her using herbal remedies like ginseng tea from the Appalachians or cod liver oil imported from New England, but these offered scant relief. Doctors recommended climate therapy, believing fresher, drier air could arrest the disease. In a lesser-known effort to combat her decline, Eliza traveled to health resorts in the mid-1850s. One documented stay was at a mineral springs facility in Indiana, possibly French Lick or West Baden, known for sulfur waters touted as curative for consumptives. Though timelines blur with later Civil War-era visits, records suggest she ventured there around 1855, enduring arduous stagecoach journeys despite frailty. Accompanied perhaps by daughter Martha, she sought the rest cure, prolonged bed rest, nutritious diets, and open-air exposure. These trips underscored her tenacity. Even as weakness mounted, she refused to surrender, viewing recovery as essential to supporting Andrew. Andrew's re-election in 1855 against know-nothing candidate Meredith P. Gentry was a landslide, 65,342 to 63,340 votes, affirming his popularity. The Know-Nothings, an anti-immigrant nativist party, targeted Johnson's pro-union views and modest origins, but he countered with appeals to religious tolerance and working-class solidarity. Eliza, though absent from rallies, contributed by drafting responses to smear campaigns, ensuring Andrew's rebuttals were measured yet incisive. His second term intensified education efforts. In 1856, the legislature passed a school funding bill allocating $750,000 from state revenues, establishing Tennessee's first statewide public system. This included provisions for normal schools to train teachers, a visionary step. Andrew also advanced homestead protections, signing laws shielding small farms from foreclosure, and regulated banks to prevent speculative bubbles. Family life during these years blended warmth with sorrow. Young Frank, toddling around the Main Street home, brought levity. Eliza doted on him, reading nursery rhymes despite labored breathing. Older children assumed more roles. Charles pursued medicine, Robert law, while Mary helped with household management. The enslaved household, Dolly, Sam, and others, provided continuity, with Eliza directing from her sickbed. Andrew visited Greenville frequently, drawing strength from family interludes. Yet tragedy struck in 1856 when son Charles, aged 26, died from injuries sustained in a fall, plunging the family into grief. Eliza, already frail, bore this loss stoically, channeling sorrow into deeper faith and support for Andrew. By 1857, Andrew's governorship culminated in his election to the U.S. Senate by the Tennessee legislature on October 8, 1857. Unanimously chosen by Democrats, this reflected his stature as a Southern Unionist. Taking his seat in December, he immediately introduced the Homestead Bill, advocating 160-acre grants to settlers, a policy vetoed earlier but prescient for Western expansion. Eliza's pride was immense. She edited his inaugural Senate speech, infusing it with populist fervor. The Civil War years, personal trials, and the role of First Lady, 1861 to 1869. The Civil War erupted on April 12, 1861, with the Confederate attack on Fort Sumter, South Carolina, plunging the United States into a bloody fratricidal conflict that would claim over 620,000 lives and reshape the nation. Tennessee, a border state with deep divisions between Unionists in the East and secessionists in the West and Middle, voted to secede on June 8, 1861, aligning with the Confederacy. Andrew Johnson, serving as Tennessee's U.S. Senator since 1857, refused to join his state's delegation in defecting. Instead, he delivered impassioned speeches in Congress, denouncing secession as treason and pledging unwavering loyalty to the Union. This stance made him a hero in the North, but a pariah in much of the South, including his hometown of Greenville in East Tennessee, a region with strong Union sympathies but under Confederate control. Labeled a traitor by Confederate sympathizers, Andrew became a target for assassination threats, forcing him to arm himself constantly and sleep with pistols under his pillow during visits home. Eliza, remaining in Greenville with their children and the household's enslaved workers, bore the brunt of local hostility. By 1861, the Johnson family owned about 8 enslaved individuals, including Dolly, a cook and nursemaid who had been with them since the 1840s, and Sam, a valet, who would later gain freedom. Eliza managed this domestic sphere with her characteristic efficiency, overseeing the tailoring shop's lingering operations, family finances, and the education of their youngest son, Andrew Jr., Frank, now 9 years old. Her tuberculosis, a chronic lung disease characterized by persistent coughing, fatigue, weight loss, and occasional hemoptysis, had fluctuated since its onset around 1852, but the stress of war exacerbated her symptoms. Doctors at the time had limited treatments for tuberculosis, often recommending rest, fresh air, nutritious diets, and sometimes herbal remedies like cod liver oil or ginseng tea from the Appalachian region. But Eliza's condition left her increasingly frail, confining her to bed during flare-ups. She avoided social engagements, preferring solitude in their Main Street home, where she read newspapers voraciously to stay informed about Andrew's activities in Washington. As Confederate forces solidified control over East Tennessee, the threats to Eliza intensified. In May 1862, Confederate authorities, viewing the Johnsons as Union sympathizers, issued an order for Eliza to evacuate their home within 36 hours, intending to confiscate the property for military use. This edict came amid a broader campaign of harassment against Unionist families in the region, where women like Eliza were often left to defend homes while husbands served in distant roles. Defiant at first, Eliza refused to comply immediately, leveraging her status as the wife of a prominent Union figure to negotiate an extension. Through appeals to local officials and perhaps invoking her fragile health, she secured a 5-month reprieve, allowing her to remain until October 1862. During this tense period, she endured verbal abuse, social ostracism, and veiled threats from neighbors and soldiers who branded her the wife of a Yankee traitor. The family's enslaved workers, aware of the precarious situation, assisted in packing valuables and preparing for potential flight, though their own fates were uncertain in the chaos of war. When the extension expired, Eliza had no choice but to flee. She sought refuge at the farm of her daughter Mary in nearby Carter County, Tennessee, a rural area with fewer Confederate patrols. Accompanied by Frank and perhaps 1 or 2 enslaved attendants like Dolly, Eliza traveled under duress, her tuberculosis making the journey excruciating. Carter County, nestled in the Appalachian foothills, offered temporary safety among Unionist kin, but the isolation deepened her sense of vulnerability. Reports from the time describe Eliza as harassed and expelled by Confederate forces, highlighting the plight of Union women in occupied territories who faced property seizures, intimidation, and forced displacement. Her letters to Andrew, though sparse due to disrupted mail services, conveyed her resolve, urging him to persist in his Union duties while assuring him of the family's welfare. In October 1862, Eliza embarked on a harrowing 3-week journey to join Andrew in Nashville, where President Lincoln had appointed him military governor of Tennessee in March 1862. As military governor, Andrew was tasked with restoring Union control over the state, suppressing guerrilla warfare, and organizing loyalist governments, a role that required him to balance martial law with political reconstruction. Nashville, recaptured by Union forces in February 1862, served as a precarious Union enclave amid Confederate raids. Eliza's trek to reach him involved crossing enemy lines, navigating treacherous mountain passes, and enduring checkpoints manned by hostile soldiers. A lesser-discussed incident during this odyssey involved Confederate General Nathan Bedford Forrest, a notorious cavalry commander known for his ruthless tactics. Forrest initially intercepted Eliza's party, detaining them and threatening to turn them back or worse. Only after intervention, possibly from Union sympathizers or through a pass secured by Andrew's influence, did Forrest relent, allowing passage. This encounter underscored the personal dangers Eliza faced, her tuberculosis flaring under the strain of cold weather, poor nutrition, and constant anxiety. Arriving in Nashville exhausted and emaciated, Eliza reunited with Andrew after nearly a year of separation. The couple's joy was tempered by her deteriorated health. She required weeks of rest in the governor's residence, a fortified building amid the city's wartime bustle. Nashville during this period was a hub of military activity, with hospitals overflowing with wounded soldiers and refugees streaming in from rural areas. Eliza, despite her frailty, resumed her supportive role, editing Andrew's proclamations and offering counsel on governance. As military governor, Andrew implemented policies like emancipating Tennessee's enslaved population in 1863, a move Eliza supported, having long managed their own households' enslaved workers with a degree of benevolence unusual for the era. In August 1863, she personally gathered the family's enslaved individuals, Sam, Dolly, and others, to announce their freedom, aligning with Andrew's evolving stance on emancipation as a war measure. This act symbolized the Johnsons' shift from Southern slaveholders to Union emancipators, though Andrew's views on racial equality remained limited. Eliza's respite in Nashville was brief. In late 1862 and into 1863, she traveled north to Ohio and Indiana to visit her older children, Martha in Indiana, and perhaps Robert or Charles in Union-held areas, crossing lines without formal escort, a testament to her grit despite physical weakness. These journeys, undertaken by train and stagecoach amid wartime disruptions, further taxed her lungs, but they allowed family reunions, crucial for morale. Tragedy struck in April 1863 when son Charles, a 33-year-old Union surgeon serving in Tennessee, died after being thrown from his horse in Nashville. Charles had studied medicine and joined the Union cause, reflecting the family's loyalty, but his accidental death under circumstances shrouded in wartime chaos devastated Eliza. Already mourning the broader horrors of war, she plunged into profound grief, her tuberculosis worsening with emotional strain. Historical accounts note that Eliza bore this loss stoically, channeling sorrow into deeper faith and redoubled support for Andrew, who was himself grief-stricken but consumed by gubernatorial duties. The year 1864 brought further upheaval, as Andrew was nominated as Lincoln's vice presidential running mate on the National Union ticket, a strategic choice to appeal to Southern Unionists and war Democrats. Andrew campaigned vigorously, traveling across the North to rally support for the war effort and Reconstruction. Eliza, remaining in Nashville, managed the family's affairs amid ongoing threats from Confederate guerrillas. Her health continued to decline, with tuberculosis confining her to bed for extended periods. Yet she corresponded with Andrew, providing encouragement and clipping newspaper articles to inform his strategies. The election victory on November 8, 1864, positioned Andrew as vice president, but joy was short-lived. On April 15, 1865, following Lincoln's assassination by John Wilkes Booth the previous night, Andrew was sworn in as the 17th President of the United States in a somber ceremony at his Washington hotel room. Eliza, still in Tennessee, was overwhelmed by the news. At age 54, her tuberculosis had rendered her an invalid, with symptoms including chronic weakness and respiratory distress that made travel arduous. She delayed her move to Washington until August 6, 1865, arriving with daughters Martha and Mary, son Frank, and grandchildren. The journey north was fraught with fear. Eliza, described by Martha as nearly frantic with anxiety over potential assassination attempts on Andrew, traveled under heavy guard. The White House, scarred by the recent tragedy and the war's end, became their new home amid Reconstruction's challenges. Andrew's presidency began tumultuously as he clashed with radical Republicans over lenient policies toward the South, vetoing civil rights bills and alienating Congress. As First Lady from 1865 to 1869, Eliza's role was profoundly limited by her health, leading to a life of seclusion that made her one of the most reclusive presidential spouses in history. Confined largely to a second-floor bedroom overlooking Andrew's office, she avoided the social whirl of Washington, delegating hostess duties to her capable daughters. Martha, 37 and a widow after her husband's death in the war, and Mary, 34, handled receptions, teas, and state dinners with poise, restoring the White House's elegance after the Lincoln's tenure. Eliza made only 2 public appearances. In 1866, she weekly greeted Queen Emma of Hawaii during a state visit, remaining seated due to frailty. And in 1868, she attended a children's ball honoring Andrew's 60th birthday, a rare outing that highlighted her devotion. Newspapers dubbed her a near-mythical figure, speculating on her invisibility and fueling rumors about her condition. Behind closed doors, Eliza exerted significant influence over White House life and Andrew's decisions. She managed household operations meticulously, overseeing servants, both black and white, with kindness, treating them as extended family. Freed from slavery's shadow, she hired formerly enslaved individuals like William Slade as steward, fostering loyalty. Her philanthropy included donations to orphanages in Baltimore and Charleston, aiding war-torn children. Daily routines revolved around quiet pursuits, voracious reading of books and periodicals, knitting scarves and quilts for family, and short walks along the residence's corridors to check on Andrew and staff. A little-known habit revealed her strategic mind. She clipped newspaper articles daily, presenting positive stories to Andrew in the evenings to uplift his spirits and negative ones in the mornings for tactical planning. This practice kept him informed amid Reconstruction's controversies, where his vetoes of the Freedmen's Bureau and Civil Rights Act of 1866 deepened rifts with Congress. Eliza's calming presence was crucial during Andrew's 1868 impeachment trial, triggered by his violation of the Tenure of Office Act in dismissing Secretary of War Edwin Stanton. As the House impeached him on February 24, 1868, and the Senate trial unfolded from March to May, the White House atmosphere grew tense. Eliza, from her upstairs sanctuary, remained steadfast, declaring after his acquittal by 1 vote on May 16th, "I knew he would be acquitted. I knew it." Andrew visited her each morning for advice, valuing her insight to temper his infamous temper. She reportedly dissuaded him from rash outbursts, urging measured responses to critics. Though disliking the White House's grandeur, preferring Greenville's simplicity, Eliza cared for Andrew's wardrobe, mending suits from his tailoring days, and ensured balanced meals despite wartime shortages, lingering into peace. Life after the White House and final years, 1869 to 1876. As Andrew Johnson's tumultuous presidency drew to a close on March 4, 1869, with the inauguration of Ulysses S. Grant, the Johnson family bid farewell to the grandeur and pressures of Washington, D.C., embarking on a long-awaited return to their roots in Greenville, Tennessee. This transition marked the end of a decade defined by the Civil War's chaos, personal tragedies, and political battles, including Andrew's historic impeachment trial in 1868, where Eliza's steadfast support from her secluded White House bedroom had been a quiet source of strength. Now, at ages 60 and 58 respectively, Andrew and Eliza sought solace in the familiar Appalachian landscape that had shaped their early lives together. Greenville, a small town nestled in the rolling hills of East Tennessee, had endured significant hardships during the war, divided loyalties, guerrilla skirmishes, and economic disruption, but it represented home, stability, and a chance for renewal. The couple's home on Main Street, once confiscated by Confederate forces in 1862 and subjected to vandalism and neglect during the occupation, had been restored through the efforts of loyal friends and Union sympathizers. This restoration symbolized not just physical rebuilding, but a metaphorical reclamation of their pre-war existence, allowing Eliza to resume her role as the family's anchor amid ongoing health challenges from tuberculosis. The years from 1869 to 1876 would blend moments of quiet domesticity, lingering grief from family losses, Andrew's persistent political ambitions, and subtle revelations about Eliza's complex legacy, all unfolding against the backdrop of a nation grappling with Reconstruction's aftermath. The journey back to Greenville was arduous, reflecting the physical and emotional toll of the preceding years. Leaving the White House, where Eliza had spent much of her time confined to her second-floor quarters due to chronic respiratory issues, persistent coughing, and debilitating fatigue, the family traveled by train and stagecoach through a still-divided South. Reconstruction policies, which Andrew had shaped with his lenient approach toward former Confederate states, vetoing measures like the Civil Rights Act of 1866 and the Freedmen's Bureau extensions, had left him a polarizing figure. Northern radicals viewed him as an obstructionist, while many Southerners appreciated his efforts to hasten readmission without harsh penalties. Eliza, ever the supportive spouse, had clipped newspaper articles during his presidency to strategize responses to criticism, a habit she continued in retirement. Upon arrival in Greenville in late March 1869, the family was greeted by a mix of admiration from Unionists and lingering resentment from ex-Confederates. The Main Street residence, a two-story frame house with parlors, bedrooms, and a detached kitchen, had been repaired. Damaged floors refinished, broken windows replaced, and the garden replanted. This home, purchased in 1851 through Eliza's prudent financial management of tailoring profits and real estate investments, stood as a testament to their ascent from poverty. Enslaved workers who had once labored there, now freed since Andrew's emancipation policies in Tennessee in 1863, had moved on, but some, like Sam and Dolly, remained in the community, transitioning to paid roles. Settling back into Greenville brought a sense of relief for Eliza, whose tuberculosis had worsened under the stresses of wartime displacements and White House isolation. The disease, untreated effectively in an era lacking antibiotics, manifested in fluctuating symptoms. Periods of relative energy punctuated by severe bouts that left her bedridden, struggling for breath and reliant on herbal remedies like cod liver oil or mountain ginseng teas. Doctors recommended fresh air and rest, which the rural Tennessee environment provided in abundance, free from the social obligations that had defined her reclusive tenure as First Lady, where she made only 2 public appearances, greeting Queen Emma of Hawaii in 1866 and attending a children's ball in 1868. Eliza embraced a life of quiet domesticity. Her days revolved around simple pleasures, reading voraciously from her collection of books and periodicals, knitting scarves and quilts for grandchildren, and overseeing the household with the help of her daughters Martha and Mary. Martha, widowed during the war, and Mary, who had assisted as White House hostess, now shared in managing the home, allowing Eliza respite. Youngest son Frank, now 17, pursued education and local apprenticeships, while the family mourned the absences of sons. Charles died 1863, and Robert, whose struggles with alcoholism had shadowed their Washington years. Tragedy struck almost immediately upon their return, deepening the family's wounds. On April 27, 1869, just weeks after leaving the White House, son Robert Johnson, age 35, took his own life in an apparent suicide by overdose of laudanum and alcohol. Robert had served as Andrew's private secretary during the presidency, a role that exposed him to the intense political pressures and public scrutiny that exacerbated his personal demons. Historical accounts suggest Robert's alcoholism stemmed from the cumulative stresses of war service, family expectations, and the impeachment ordeal, where he witnessed his father's near removal from office. The discovery of his body in the Greenville home shattered the family anew, compounding earlier losses like Charles's accidental death in 1863. Eliza, already frail, plunged into profound grief. Her tuberculosis flared under the emotional strain, confining her to bed for extended periods. Yet true to her resilient nature, honed through wartime exiles, such as her 1862 flight from Greenville and perilous journey to Nashville, Eliza channeled sorrow into quiet fortitude. She found solace in faith, drawing from Bible stories she had long used to instill moral values in her children, and in supporting Andrew, who was equally devastated but channeled his pain into political vindication. Andrew's post-presidency years were marked by a dogged pursuit of redemption and relevance. Bitter from his impeachment acquittal by a single Senate vote in 1868 and the Republican dominance under Grant, he sought to reclaim his political stature. In 1870, he ran unsuccessfully for a U.S. Senate seat from Tennessee, losing amid factional Democratic infighting and lingering Reconstruction resentments. Undeterred, he campaigned again in 1872 for a House seat, only to face defeat once more. These setbacks isolated him somewhat in Greenville, where he lectured locally on constitutional principles, emphasizing states' rights and his unionist legacy. Eliza, preferring privacy, seldom accompanied him on these outings, but offered counsel at home, editing drafts of speeches as she had throughout his career, from his early days as Greenville alderman in the 1830s to gubernatorial addresses in the 1850s. Her influence tempered his fiery temper, a trait that had fueled clashes with Congress during his presidency. Meanwhile, Eliza occasionally ventured out independently, enjoying brief travels without Andrew, perhaps to visit relatives in nearby Carter County or to seek milder climates for her health, echoing her mid-1850s stays at Indiana Mineral Springs for tuberculosis relief. These solo excursions, rare given her condition, underscored her desire for personal freedom after years of supporting Andrew's ambitions from the shadows. Greenville itself was undergoing transformation in the post-war era, providing context for the Johnsons' retirement. The town, with a population of around 1,500 in 1870, was rebuilding its economy, centered on agriculture, small manufacturing, and trade along the East Tennessee and Virginia Railroad, which Andrew had championed as governor. Unionist sentiments dominated East Tennessee, shielding the Johnsons from severe backlash, but economic hardships persisted. Inflation, crop failures, and the integration of freed black workers into society. The family's former enslaved individuals added layers to this narrative. Dolly, who had served as cook and nursemaid since the 1840s, had given birth to children in the Johnson household, complicating the dynamics of pre-war domestic life. After emancipation, some like Sam and Dolly's daughter, Margaret, chose to stay, transitioning to paid employment, Sam as a valet and handyman, Margaret as a domestic helper, while living rent-free in Andrew's old tailoring shop, converted into modest quarters. This arrangement reflected Eliza's benevolent management style. Unusual for the era, she treated them with familial kindness, a continuation of her White House philanthropy, where she donated to orphanages in Baltimore and Charleston. However, it also hinted at paternalistic ties rooted in the antebellum South, where Eliza had supervised enslaved labor since the 1830s, directing tasks from farming to child care while Andrew pursued politics. Amid these domestic rhythms, Andrew's political fortunes shifted dramatically in early 1875. Tennessee's Democratic legislature, regaining strength as Reconstruction waned, elected him to the U.S. Senate on January 26, 1875, after 54 ballots, a vindication that made him the only former president to return to the Senate. The news brought short-lived joy to the household. Andrew, at 66, traveled to Washington for a special session in March, delivering a scathing speech against Grant's administration, accusing it of corruption and overreach. Eliza, too weak to accompany him, celebrated quietly in Greenville, her pride evident in letters urging moderation. This triumph reaffirmed Andrew's Jacksonian populist ideals, championing the common man against elite privilege that Eliza had helped refine through decades of editorial assistance. Yet, the elation was fleeting. Returning to Tennessee in summer, Andrew suffered a debilitating stroke on July 28, 1875, while visiting his daughter Mary in Carter County. He lingered briefly, passing away on July 31, 1875, at age 66. The nation mourned with mixed sentiments. Northern papers highlighted his controversies, while Southern ones praised his unionism. Eliza, devastated and physically incapacitated by her advancing tuberculosis, was unable to attend the funeral. Confined to bed with severe weakness and respiratory distress, she relied on family to handle arrangements. Andrew was buried on a hill overlooking Greenville, a site he had chosen for its scenic view, later designated as the Andrew Johnson National Cemetery. In his absence, Eliza oversaw the execution of his will, which distributed modest assets, land, the home and savings from his tailoring and political careers, among surviving children and grandchildren. This responsibility, though burdensome, reflected her lifelong financial acumen, from tracking shop ledgers in the 1830s to investing in real estate that elevated their status. Despite grief, Eliza found moments of peace in her final months, surrounded by family and the town's supportive unionist community. Lesser-known threads in Eliza's story reveal deeper complexities to her character and legacy. Family lore suggests a deliberate destruction of personal records, possibly to shield sensitive aspects of their lives from posterity. Granddaughter Margaret Johnson Patterson Bartlett, in a 1980 interview, alluded to this, noting that Andrew's papers were sold or discarded with the sentiment, "Let the dead bury the dead." This purging might have concealed ties to slavery, such as the ownership and management of individuals like Dolly, whose children were born under the Johnsons' roof, or personal sufferings, including Eliza's chronic illness and family tragedies. The decision added an air of mystery to Eliza, whose reclusive nature had already rendered her near mythical during her White House years. Post-emancipation relationships further nuanced this. Sam and Margaret's choice to remain as paid workers, residing gratis in the old shop, spoke to bonds forged over decades, blending affection with the era's racial hierarchies. Eliza's interactions with them, treating them as extended family, as she had White House servants, highlighted her compassionate side, contrasting the broader South's turbulent race relations during Reconstruction. These final years encapsulated the Johnsons' enduring partnership. Andrew's public pursuits underpinned by Eliza's private resilience. From their 1827 marriage in Greenville, where Eliza taught the illiterate Tailor to read, to his presidential heights, her influence was profound yet understated. In retirement, amid grief and health battles, Eliza embodied quiet endurance, managing home and legacy as Andrew sought vindication. By 1876, Greenville had reclaimed its pre-war tranquility, with the Johnson story woven into its fabric, a tale of ascent, adversity, and unspoken depths. Their home, preserved as a historic site, stands as a reminder of Eliza's pivotal, if shadowed, role in American history, consequences, and historical significance. Eliza's legacy ripples through time, a quiet force shaping American history and culture. Her support propelled Andrew from seamstress to president, influencing the turbulent path of Reconstruction. As the only Southern senator loyal to the Union, Andrew's policies, vetoing the Civil Rights Bill clashing with Congress, bear her mark through her advice. Her reclusive style reset expectations of first ladies, returning to 19th century modesty after the prominence of Mary Lincoln, a pattern repeated by later figures such as Ida McKinley. Yet she is often overlooked, ranking 21st in the 1982 Siena poll, her influence more felt than seen. Culturally, Eliza represents the behind-the-scenes power of women in an era of limited power. Andrew's education emphasizes how individual action can change the trajectory of a nation, a lesson in empowerment amid constraints. Emotionally, her battle with tuberculosis reflects the broader health crisis of the 19th century, teaching resilience. Politically, her Confederacy in Tennessee highlights the cost of loyalty, informing modern debates about division and unity. Today, we learn from Eliza the value of quiet strength. In relationships, her cooperation demonstrates the transformative power of support. In adversity, her endurance inspires those facing chronic illness or loss. Her story urges us to remember the erased voices, women, slaves, who contributed to building America. Why she matters. In a noisy world, Eliza whispers that true impact often lies in the shadows, a fragile beauty that endures through pain. Ultimately, Eliza McCardle Johnson's life is a testament to enduring love and quiet strength. From her fateful glance in Greenville to her final days overlooking the Tennessee hills, she navigated poverty, war, and power with a grace born of need. Her battles with illness and grief humanize a tumultuous presidency, reminding us that behind every leader is an often invisible pillar. We learn a moral about quiet influence. In supporting others, we shape destinies. Eliza's legacy endures as a gentle call to honor the unsung, to find beauty in life's contradictions, and to find closure in knowing her strength still resonates,